Monday, August 12, The Cost of Discipleship. Read Mark chapter 8, verses 31 to 38. What does Jesus teach here about the cost of following Christ? We begin at verse 31 of chapter 8. He then began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things, and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the teachers of the law, and that he must be killed, and after 3 days rise again. He spoke plainly about this, and Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. But when Jesus turned and looked at his disciples, he rebuked Peter. "Get behind me, Satan," he said. "You do not have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns." Then he called the crowd to him along with his disciples and said, "Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever wants to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for me and for the gospel will save it. What good is it for someone to gain the whole world, yet forfeit their souls? Or what can anyone give in exchange for their soul? If anyone is ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, the Son of Man will be ashamed of them when he comes in his Father's glory with the holy angels." The disciples have come to a crucial turning point in their relationship with Jesus. They now know that he is the Messiah. The reader of Mark has known this from the beginning of the book, as we read in chapter 1, verse 1, the beginning of the good news about Jesus the Messiah, the Son of God, and thus has had an advantage over the sometimes bumbling disciples. When Jesus first called the disciples, he said he would make them fishers of men in verse 17. "Come, follow me," Jesus said, "and I will send you out to fish for people." There was no talk of trouble, but now that they really know who he is, he unfolds to them the goal of his mission, that it is necessary for him to suffer many things, to be rejected and killed, and then to rise again after 3 days. It is shocking news. Peter, who just confessed that Jesus is the Messiah, takes him aside and rebukes him for saying such things. All of this was told in indirect discourse, but now the gospel writer reports the words of Jesus, words that must have stung as Peter heard them. He calls Peter Satan and tells him to get out of his way, since such thoughts are not in accord with the will of God. Ellen White writes in The Desire of Ages, page 415, Peter's words were not such as would be a help and solace to Jesus in the great trial before him. They were not in harmony with God's purpose of grace toward a lost world, nor with the lesson of self-sacrifice that Jesus had come to teach by his own example. End of quote. Followers of Jesus are called to have the same goal he has, to take the cross and to follow him. Crucifixion was the most cruel, humiliating, and intimidating method of execution that the Romans had. Everyone wanted to avoid the cross. So why would anyone want to take up the cross as a symbol of their devotion to Jesus? Jesus explains not only the cost of discipleship, but also its great value. In the paradox of Christian faith, losing one's life becomes the way to find it. In contrast, gaining the whole world but forfeiting eternal life is nonsensical. As missionary Jim Elliot put it so eloquently in his journal of October 28, 1949, "He is no fool who gives what he cannot keep to gain that which he cannot lose." And so to finish today, in John 12:25 we read, "He who loves his life will lose it, and he who hates his life in this world will keep it for eternal life." How have you experienced the reality of these words? This lesson was read by Dr. Percy Harrold for Christian Services for the Blind. Sponsored by the Sabbath School Department and distributed through Hope Channel Australia, this podcast is also redistributed by Hope Channel Germany, Christian Record Services for the Blind. It is also available on SoundCloud and through multiple podcast distributors, including Apple iTunes. And you can listen and watch at the same time on YouTube. Remember, God is always faithful.